In this video, I'll be simplifying the concept of CORS in web development. I have a project example here, which I'm going to be using to show you how CORS works, or also show you why you have CORS errors sometimes. So if you have been working on web development, maybe on the back-end side, you must have heard about the concept of CORS. Or if you've been working on web development on the front-end side, then you may have probably come across errors like this saying your request was blocked due to CORS policy. Now, what exactly does this policy mean, and how do you solve such CORS errors? Now, the first thing to understand is same origin policy. Traditionally, browsers had same origin policy, and this is a policy that ensured that when you open a page on a browser, that page is only communicating with servers of the same origin, which means example.com open on your browser is only communicating with example.com as a server. And when I say communication, I'm referring to things like fetch API, request, and response. So for example, with this project I have here, this is on localhost 3000 as an origin, and this is an Express server that I set up here. So when you go to app.get here, I am sending this file frontend index.html, which is this file here, and I'm running this server on localhost 3000. Now in this index.html, I have this script where I'm making a fetch call to this API. As you can see, it is on the same origin. I'm making a get request. So if I come here now and I refresh, this is same origin. Everything is going to work fine. You can see the index.html where we do console log response is this. You can see we have that here in the console. Everything is working fine. Also, when you do app.get/API here, I do console log get request to API, so you can also see it here in the server. So the request is processed on the server, and as well on the client we get that response, and we're able to use that response for whatever we want to do. Now this is same origin policy, but I also open this index.html on another origin, which is localhost 5500, and this is still running this same script. Now if I refresh here, you notice that the server is still processing the request. You can see we get more logs, but then what you notice on the browser here is we now have an error. Access to fetch this from this has been blocked by CORS policy. No access control allow origin header is presented on the requested resource. And this is one of the problems that happens when you try to communicate with a server on a different origin than the one you have on your browser. The origin we have on this browser is localhost 5500, but then we are trying to access the server at localhost 3000. But the same origin policy does not approve of that. Even if the server actually processed the request, because the browser does not approve of what we are doing because of the same origin policy, we now get this error here. But then this is not the limitation we want in some cases. Now, sometimes when you're building applications, you might have your front end and your back end on the same origin, and all of that works fine. You don't need CORS for that, but that won't always be the case. Sometimes you might want your front end on one origin, but then you want your back end, your API, on another origin, and you need to be able to create an effective and even secure communication between these origins, because having communication or script running for different origins might bring some client-side related attacks, because you wouldn't want somebody to create a fake website that has access to your server's origin and is able to perform the same communication that it would do, like as if that fake website was an original website. So there are a couple of client-side related attacks that can occur when you have different origins talking to each other, and browsers have implemented different mechanisms for mitigating the risks that comes with different origins, and one of those mechanisms is CORS. So with CORS, we can tell the browser that when you're running this page, you can safely communicate with this cross origin. Before CORS existed, what some people did in the past when they needed multiple origins to communicate with each other is that they have proxy servers. So you have your browser on example.com, and then you have a proxy server on example.com, maybe your API/API, and then your browser is able to communicate with this server. This is same origin policy, no problem. The browser doesn't throw any errors, and then this proxy server can now communicate with this other server, because CORS is not a thing that applies to server communication. cross-origin servers can communicate with each other good and fine. So this server can communicate with this server, get the data that this browser needs, and then pass the data from here and then from here back to this place. Now you can see this is a longer process. You have to go from here to here to here and then back and forth. But by setting up CORS, you can tell the browser, hey, it is safe to communicate directly with this server. Now the implementation of CORS happens in two ways. First, on the server side, you configure the rules. Basically, you are saying these are the cross origins that I approve of. Then by defining those rules, which the server sends as a response to the browser can see those rules and enforce those rules. Now, what do I mean by this? Now, depending on the backend language that you are using, you can configure CORS in different ways. What I have here is a simple Node.js Express server, and I'm using this CORS library. Now, the simple way to use this CORS library is after you have your const app equals express, you can say app.use and then you call CORS. Now what we're doing here is that this server is saying that I can accept requests from any origin. So by telling the browser that, the browser knows that it can now send requests to the server, get a response and process that response. So now if we should come here and we should refresh, you can see we now have response is this, and this is coming from this then block. So on the server, we have get request to API. Remember, the server is going to process requests that comes from same origin and also from cross origin. The server doesn't have a problem in that. Of course, you still need to implement security measures to know what you are doing on the server side, but it is the browser that reads that information from the server that, hey, I can accept any origin, and then the server can run this successfully. So now if we should go to the network tab here, this is our API. If I should open this API, you're going to see that one of the responses that the browser gets from the server is this access control allow origin. Now before I explain what this means, let me go here and comment this line again. Now if we should refresh, we have an error. If we go to the console error, the error reads access to fetch this has been blocked by CORS policy, and then it says no access control allow origin header is present on the requested result. So what happens here is when you make a script request like this, like using the fetch API on the network tab, you can see here that the browser, as one of the request headers, it sends the origin of this request, which is localhost 5500, and that is it here, localhost 5500. Now the request gets to the server processes the request however you configure the server to process the request. But then since this is a cross origin, the browser would expect this header access control allow origin. Also, you notice that access control allow origin is no longer here in the response header, and that header should match the current origin that we have here. So that way the browser knows that this is one of the origins that the server approves of. But because we haven't set up CORS here, that is why the browser throws this error. But now if I should uncomment that part again and I refresh, now if we go back to the network tab and we come here, you can now see back in the response headers we have access control allow origin, and this asterisk means allow any origin, and that is why our request is working fine. If we should also come here and put a post request, if I refresh, everything is still working fine. On the server, we have this post API where we have post request to /API. We have this here. So the server processes the request, and then it also tells the browser, again, because we have used app.use.cors, it tells the browser that I can accept requests from this origin, and that is why this then block that we have still runs fine here successfully. So what we have simply done here is to create an exception for the same origin policy. The same origin policy that the browser uses by default allows communication, request and response between the same origins. But with what we have done here by using app.use.cors, where we have been able to respond with a header like access control allow origin, we're not able to tell the browser that this is an exception. This server can accept requests from any origin. Now, another thing you can do instead of using app use.cors like this is that you can also set it up like this, where you have CORS options. And when you use app use.cors, normally what you are doing is asterisk like this. This is still going to be the same thing. If you refresh, we don't have any errors. This is saying any origin, I can accept such requests. Now, what if you wanted the browser to send cookies to the client? If we come here, if we go to application, I set up some default cookies. So I have cookie 1 and cookie 2. And if we go back to the network tab, now I'm on localhost 3000, the same origin. If I should refresh, we have this API. We are using the fetch API. By default, cookies will be sent if the origin is the same as the target. So our origin is localhost 3000 and our server is also localhost 3000. So what you can see here is that the browser sends the cookies that we have to that server since it is the same origin. But if we go here now with refresh, go to the network tab and open this place, you can see here in the request that because the origin is different from the target localhost 3000, you can see that the cookies are not sent here. But then if your backend is on a different origin, you might need access to cookies. So here in your fetch API, you can also do credentials include, so that way you can send credentials like cookies to the backend. Now if we should come here, although this network field, which I will explain in a second, you can see that as part of the request we have the cookies also sent, and on the backend we can read such cookies. So if I go to this post API here, if I should refresh, you can see that we have our cookies on the backend, but then we still have a console error. Even though the server actually processed the request, it got access to the cookies, what we have here again is a violation of the CORS policy. And if we should read the error, it says access to fetch this from origin this has been blocked by CORS policy, and the error here is the value of the access control allow origin header in the response must not be the wildcard asterisk when the request credentials mode is included. So this is also one of the rules of the CORS policy. For the browser to process a response gotten from the server, that means the server's origin cannot be asterisk. So in this case, the browser's origin can be localhost 5500, which is where our client is currently running. And if we think about this, this is actually a security measure, because if your origin is asterisk, then it means any front-end application can access the server. And if somebody should create a fake website that looks like our own website and that person is sending a request to localhost 3000, you wouldn't want that person to be able to get the cookies information that we have saved on our browser for localhost 3000. So in that sense, you want to ensure that the origin is something specific like this. That way, if somebody should create a fake website, because it is a different origin, they will not have access to the cookies of the original website when sending requests to that server. But then that is not all. If we should refresh, we still get another error. Even if we have actually specified the origin that we want, what we have here again is has been blocked by CORS policy. The value of the access control allow credentials header in the promise is this, which must be true. So we also need to explicitly say that part of the CORS that the server is setting should be true. So now if we should refresh, we no longer have that error. So you can see how CORS here is allowing us to be secure when allowing cross-origin communication. So by setting this on the server, the browser knows, okay, this origin is safe, and it also knows I can send credentials. If you're not setting these things, then the browser is going to throw an error saying that you are violating the CORS policy. So like I said earlier, the browser enforces the rules. The server sets the rules, but it's the browser that enforces the rules. What this server here is saying is, if we should go to the configuration for the CORS library, this is what the server is doing. The server is setting these headers in the response. So when we have origin here, this is what the server is setting, this header. You can also specify the methods that you want. For example, I can say accept methods get, post, and put, and that is setting the access control allow methods. Where we have credentials, this is setting the access control allow credentials header. This is setting these headers in the response that gets to the browser, and then the browser reads such response to know if it is about abiding by the CORS policy or if it is violating the policy. So the browser relies on this information gotten from the server so that the browser knows if it's supposed to process the request or to throw an error or to make any other decision that it might want to make. So if we should go back to our application now, let's set an origin of 5501. Well, now we're going to have an error again. What you notice again is that the server is still processing the request. So CORS doesn't stop the server from processing requests. Even if the request is not coming from this origin, CORS by default would not stop that. You still need to implement other logic in your backend to say only process requests from this origin, but CORS is not a server thing. CORS is a browser thing. All we are doing here is telling the browser something. It doesn't stop CORS from still running this request here, because as you can see, we still have post request to /API and the server still has access to the cookies because we sent the cookies from the client. But then on the client, the browser, we have an error which says the access control origin header has a value of localhost 5501, which is not equal to the supplied origin. The supplied origin is localhost 5500 and we are trying to communicate with 5501, and because that is not part of the origins that the server tells the browser that it allows, then the browser throws that error. So CORS doesn't prevent the server from executing requests, and this is one of the misconceptions about CORS. People usually think, or I used to think, that CORS was a way of telling the server what to process and what not to process, but that is wrong. As you can see, even when it is coming from a different origin than what we specified as the allowed origin, the browser is still going to run its thing. What CORS is doing in this place is that it is preventing the browser from executing the response that it got from the server. But then if we should change this back to 5500, well, the server is going to run fine and the client is also going to run fine because this allowed origin matches the origin where our request is coming from. But then that doesn't mean that the browser sends every request to the server to execute before the server gives it a response of allowed origins. For example, if I should come here and I should put here in our server, we have this API for put where we say console log put request to API. And let's say I come here and I remove this put from the allowed methods. Now if I should run this, what you notice on the server is no matter how many times I refresh, we don't have put request to API. So this is the API here and we have console log put request to API. But if I should close this server, run it again, if I keep refreshing, you see that the put request to the API doesn't work. And then we have an error on the browser side that says access to fetch this has been blocked because method put is not allowed by access control allow methods in pre-flight response. So this is another concept to understand when working with CORS. So CORS allows you to create exceptions for the same origin policy. Now CORS does not fix all the issues that comes with client-side attacks when working with different origins. CORS is just one of those mechanisms at the application level that can help you reduce the risk involved. But as a developer, you still need to set up other things. You still need to implement your authentication, authorization, all of these operations on the back end. You still need to implement them in the safest and secured way. CORS is just one of those mechanisms that tries to help, but it doesn't mean that CORS solves everything. You still have some responsibilities as a developers. Now, what we have looked at in this video is a fundamental concept of CORS, but then there are still more things to understand about CORS. For example, the concept of pre-flighted request. What exactly does that mean? I might also have questions like, is CORS a browser thing or a server thing? I think I already answered that question a bit in this video by showing you that it is majorly a browser thing, but I also make another video going into more detail showing you why it's a browser thing and not a server thing. And one more question you might also have is, why do you never encounter CORS errors when working with development tools like Postman, but you encounter it in your browser? Well, I'm going to answer that in more videos about CORS that I'll be making, but I hope this video gives you a good understanding of what CORS are and why you need to do all of this allow origins on your server. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with others, and also subscribe for more simplified videos like this. And as well, watch out for my upcoming videos where I talk about more concepts related to CORS.